AP 120, Chapter 13, Topics, Anatomy of the Heart. So, it turns out the cardiovascular system is a closed circuit, including the heart and the blood vessels. And what this basically means is that blood flows from the heart throughout the blood vessels, going to the lungs and body, and then back to the heart over and over again. So, it's just a continuous circulation. And the functions of the cardiovascular system, of course, is to supply oxygen and nutrients to the tissues and to remove wastes from the tissues, including carbon dioxide, and transporting lots of other important substances throughout the body. So the big function is moving materials throughout the body. So there are two main circuits to the cardiovascular system. You have the pulmonary circuit. The pulmonary circuit carries deoxygenated blood from the heart to the lungs, and then oxygen blood returns from the lungs to the heart. So pulmonary circuit, deoxygenated blood from the heart to the lungs, and then oxygenated blood from the lungs to the heart. And then the systemic circuit sends blood from the heart, oxygenated blood from the heart to all of the tissues of the body, and then returns deoxygenated blood back to the heart. So again, systemic circuit is carrying oxygenated blood from the heart to all the tissues of the body, and then deoxygenated blood returns to the heart. All right, the heart is basically a hollow cone-shaped structure. It's basically two muscular pumps side by side, so two different muscular pumps that happen to be forming the same structure. And where is the heart located? It is located in the thoracic cavity, in the pericardial cavity, and in the mediastinum. So here with this view of the thoracic cavity, we see the heart lies along the midline of the body, within the thoracic cavity, within the mediastinum, which is the space between the lungs, and within the pericardial cavity, which is basically the space surrounded by the pericardium, that serous membrane. Now, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, or CPR, is successful because the heart happens to lie next to two rigid bony structures, the sternum and the vertebral column. So it's possible by putting pressure on the chest to push the heart against the vertebral column, causing blood to pump throughout the body. Here's another view of the thoracic cavity. Here's the heart. However, we can't see the heart because this is a picture of the heart within the pericardium, within that serous membrane. So when we look at the pericardium, that bag that surrounds the heart, we see that it has a thick, dense connective tissue structure that's opaque, called the fibrous pericardium. And then deep to that is the serous pericardium, that thin two-layered structure with one layer, the visceral layer, lying on the heart, and then the parietal layer attached to the fibrous pericardium, and then in between them a thin space filled with serous fluid. And of course, as we know, serous pericardium important because it provides lubrication. It helps to reduce the friction the heart experiences as it's constantly pumping. So again, here's just another image. Here's the heart. Here's the serous pericardium. Push the heart into it. Now you have two layers, the visceral layer on the wall of the heart and the parietal layer that's adjacent to the fibrous pericardium. And of course, its function is to reduce friction. All right, then we have the layers of the heart wall. So now we're going through the layers of the heart itself. The most superficial layer is called the epicardium. And the epicardium, it turns out, is the visceral layer of the serous pericardium, as well as additional tissues lying on the surface of the heart. So the epicardium, the most superficial layer of the heart wall, is composed of the visceral layer of the serous pericardium, as well as additional tissues, adipose tissue, other fibrous tissues on the surface of the heart. The middle layer of the heart wall is the thickest, and it is called the myocardium. And the myocardium is where you find all of the cardiac muscle tissue. So this is the part of the heart wall that does the contracting, that causes the pumping. And then the deepest layer lining the inner spaces of the heart is the endocardium. The endocardium is a thin layer of endothelium and some connective tissue, and it is very smooth and reduces the friction that the heart experiences from all the blood vessels, of all the blood cells rushing through the chambers of the heart. So endocardium, nice and smooth, minimizes the friction of all those blood cells rushing through the heart. Here's a view of an actual heart with thin epicardium. Here, the epicardium is a little thicker because you've got the fatty tissue, the very thick myocardium, and then the very thin endocardium lining the inside of the heart. So there are 4 chambers to the heart. Hopefully you already know them. They are the right atrium, the right ventricle, the left atrium, and the left ventricle. Again, this is the patient's right and left. And the right atrium is receiving blood from veins, very large veins, and the left atrium also receives blood from veins, somewhat smaller sized veins, but still veins carrying blood. And then, of course, the ventricles, when they contract, pump blood into arteries. So blood arrives, blood comes to the heart in veins, and blood leaves the heart in arteries. This tissue here represents the interventricular septum. This is the wall that separates the right and left ventricles. So interventricular septum, right ventricle, left ventricle. And again, it's worth mentioning that the heart is 2 pumps that are side by side. The right pump sending blood to the lungs, the left pump sending blood throughout the body. On the surface of the heart, you can see these little flaps, the right and left auricles. The auricles are part of the atria, and what an auricle does is it basically increases the volume within the atrium so that it has as much blood within it as the ventricles can hold. So the volume of blood within the atria is the same as the volume of blood in the ventricles. All right, there are 4 valves within the heart. There are 2 called atrioventricular valves. Atrioventricular because they lie between the atrium and the ventricle. On the right side, we have the tricuspid valve. Tricuspid because it has 3 little leaflets or cusps, as it were. And then on the left side, you have the bicuspid valve, also known as the mitral valve. The bicuspid valve has 2 little leaflets or cusps. The little leaflets are attached to muscles on the walls of the heart. These muscles are called papillary muscles, and how the leaflets are attached is via these thin little string-like structures called the chordae tendineae. So the chordae tendineae are tendinous structures connecting the cusps of the valves to the papillary muscles on the walls of the ventricles. And then we have 2 semilunar valves. The right semilunar valve is called the pulmonary valve. It leads to the pulmonary trunk. And then the left semilunar valve is the aortic valve. We can't see it in this picture, but it's back there. And it leads to the aorta. And these semilunar valves, they have 3 little cups, as it were, 1, 2, 3, that will fill when blood backflows a little bit to close those valves. And that is it for this part of the lecture.